The axe came down once. One perfect swing, a clean slice, and the head of King Charles I of England fell forward onto the scaffold. A burst of red spattered across the wooden boards, spraying more than 15 feet. The crowd gasped. Thousands pressed closer, fighting to glimpse the headless body of a man who once ruled over 3 kingdoms. It was January 30th, 1649. The doctrine of divine right, the belief that kings ruled by God's will, died with him. But to understand how England reached this moment, we must step back to the frail boy who was never meant to be king, and the world he would destroy. A crown never meant to be his Charles Stuart was born the second son of King James VI of Scotland, the man who later became James I of England. The crown was meant for Charles's older brother, Prince Henry, bold, educated, already adored by his people. Charles, by contrast, was quiet, sickly, and prone to stammering. He was considered too fragile for leadership, but fate intervened. In 1612, at just 18, Prince Henry died of typhoid fever, and the crown passed to the overlooked, uncertain younger brother. A boy raised in shadows was now heir to one of the most powerful thrones in Europe. When King James died in 1625, Charles was 24. He inherited a deeply divided kingdom, Protestant, suspicious of Catholic influence, weary from religious conflict. And his first act would ignite a political fire that would burn for decades. He married a Catholic princess. Henrietta Maria of France was 15. She didn't speak English. Her wedding was conducted by proxy. Charles wasn't even there. She arrived in England escorted by 29 Catholic priests, hidden within her retinue. Under English law, such priests faced execution. Charles concealed them in secret chambers inside his palaces. It was the first of many defiant acts that would erode Parliament's trust and begin the slow unraveling of his reign. The personal rule. England's Parliament had long served as the watchdog of the realm's purse. Kings could not raise taxes without its approval. But Charles saw Parliament as a nuisance, a gathering of men who dared to limit the divine. When they denied him funds for his military campaigns, he dissolved them. In 1629, he announced he would rule alone. No parliament, no consent, only the king's command. For 11 years, he did exactly that. Historians call it the personal rule. His critics called it tyranny. To fund his rule, he turned to desperate measures. He sold noble titles to merchants. He resurrected medieval fines. He taxed windows, prompting citizens to brick them up. He extended a coastal naval tax, ship money, to every household in England, whether they lived by the sea or not. When a landowner named John Hampden refused to pay, Charles had him tried for treason. But the court ruled against the king, declaring taxation without Parliament's consent unlawful. Charles ignored it. He fined Hampden anyway and doubled the tax on his neighbors. England saw its monarch for what he had become, a ruler without restraint. God, war, and the Scots. In 1637, Charles made his most fatal mistake. He tried to impose an English prayer book on Scotland, a kingdom fiercely proud of its Presbyterian faith. The Scots rioted. And when Charles demanded obedience, they raised an army instead. He needed troops to fight them. Troops needed money. And money meant Parliament. So after 11 years, he called them back. In April 1640, the same men he had once dismissed returned to Westminster, bitter, defiant, and hungry for revenge. They stripped the king of many powers, abolished his taxes, and demanded control over his army. Charles, furious, did the unthinkable. He marched into the House of Commons with armed guards to arrest 5 of its leading members. but they had already fled. Standing in the chamber, the king's temper boiled. No monarch had ever entered that room. To Parliament, it was a sacred space, and his intrusion was blasphemy against the English Constitution. That moment shattered everything. England split in two: royalists for the king, parliamentarians for the people. The English Civil War had begun. England at war with itself. The war lasted 7 brutal years. Families divided. Fathers fought sons. England became a graveyard of loyalty and faith. Charles, no general, proved disastrous in command. His forces were crushed at the Battle of Naseby in 1645. When Parliament captured his personal letters, the scandal was catastrophic. The documents revealed that Charles had been negotiating with Catholic France and Ireland, promising to restore Catholicism in exchange for troops. One letter even agreed to allow 10,000 Irish soldiers to land in Wales and march toward London, burning Protestant churches along the way. Even his loyalists recoiled in disgust. By 1646, Charles was finished. His armies broken, his support gone. He surrendered to the Scots, believing they would protect him as their king too. But loyalty had a price. For 400,000 florins, the equivalent of $50 million today, they sold him to the English Parliament. The King of England, traded like livestock. The trial of a God's anointed parliament faced an impossible problem. How do you try a king who, by law, cannot be tried? To execute him, they had to invent a new law, a new court, the High Tribunal, composed of 135 judges. Half refused to participate. Of those who appeared, only a handful would sign the final death warrant. Charles refused to acknowledge the court. He would not plead, would not answer. He told them they had no authority to judge him, and he was right. But his defiance sealed his fate. For 5 days, the prosecutor, John Cook, recited a catalogue of crimes. He accused the king of tyranny, murder, and treason against his own people. The evidence was undeniable. Orders for mass killings, burnings, executions, many bearing Charles's own signature. Charles stood silent, calm, and proud. He believed that his composure would outlive their verdict, that posterity would see his dignity and call him righteous. On January 27, 1649, the sentence was delivered: death by beheading, within 3 days. Before we go deeper into the fall of England's divine kings, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We uncover the blood, the politics, and the horror history tried to hide. The last night, Charles spent his final hours in quiet reflection. He wrote farewell letters to his family, to his wife, to his daughter Elizabeth, and to his 13-year-old son, exiled in France. He burned every private paper, leaving nothing behind that could be twisted by his enemies. He grew his beard long for the occasion, not from vanity, but from symbolism. Kings were buried with their beards intact, a sign of dignity. He ordered 2 shirts for the morning to conceal any shivering from the cold. He would not let the crowd mistake courage for fear. At dawn, he prayed aloud. "I die a faithful Christian," he said, according to the profession of the Church of England. Outside, a scaffold had been built before the banqueting house, the very building where he had once dined in royal splendor. Now, it would be his stage of humiliation. The execution at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the king stepped out into the cold January air. The scaffold was surrounded by soldiers, muskets ready, to prevent any attempt at rescue. It was built unusually low, just 4 feet high. Parliament wanted the crowd to see less, not more. They feared his courage would turn him into a martyr. The executioner wore black robes, a false beard, and a mask. His name was never recorded. Charles turned to address the crowd, but the drummers drowned him out. He spoke instead to the men on the scaffold beside him. He asked forgiveness for his enemies. He proclaimed his innocence. Then he knelt, or rather lay flat, for the block was too low for dignity. He stretched his arms forward, the silent signal that he was ready. A single blow. The axe severed his neck cleanly. Witnesses said the heart continued to beat 37 times before it stilled. The executioner held the head aloft. "Behold the head of a traitor," he declared, but his voice cracked, trembling with emotion. Some claimed he wept behind the mask. The blood of the martyr. The crowd surged forward in frenzy. They dipped gloves, scarves, and rags into the blood. They scraped wood from the platform with knives. Women rubbed the blood on their hands, believing it would grant fertility. Merchants sold relics, fragments of the scaffold, shreds of his shirt, for sums equal to a year's wage. By nightfall, every trace of royal blood had been stolen or sold. His body was sewn back together, the head stitched to the torso, and buried in secret at St. George's Chapel, Windsor. Only 4 men attended: a bishop, 2 soldiers, and a gravedigger. No coffin inscription, no procession. A king buried like a criminal. The New Order. Across Europe, the reaction was outrage. France, Spain, and the Dutch Republic cut ties with England. The Catholic Church declared Charles a martyr. 10-year-old Louis XIV was so frightened by the news that he refused to sleep alone for weeks, terrified that his people might one day murder him too. Oliver Cromwell emerged as the new ruler, Lord Protector of England. He called it a republic, but ruled as a dictator. He abolished the monarchy, banned theater, dancing, and Christmas celebrations. England had traded one tyrant for another. When Cromwell died in 1658, the country was exhausted. His son Richard could not hold power. Within 2 years, the exiled prince returned. Charles II, son of the executed king, reclaimed the throne. The monarchy was restored, and vengeance began. Every surviving judge who had signed the death warrant was hunted down. Some were hanged, drawn, and quartered. Even the corpses of dead regicides were exhumed and mutilated. Cromwell's head was mounted on a pike above Westminster for 24 years. The message was unmistakable. The crown remembers. The echo of the axe. Charles III remains the only English king executed by his own people. His death ended the medieval idea that monarchs ruled by divine right and began the modern belief that no ruler is above the law. That principle would echo through revolutions in America, France, and beyond. But in England, it came at a terrible cost. 7 years of war, 200,000 dead. A kingdom divided against itself. In life, Charles was obstinate, self-righteous, and blind to his people's pain. In death, he became their legend, a martyr to kingship. The parliament that sought to destroy monarchy instead consecrated it in blood. The axe that fell on that January morning cut deeper than flesh. It split the world in two, between the divine and the human, between absolute power and the right to question it. And though centuries have passed, that echo remains. The echo of a blade that said, "No ruler, however anointed, stands above the people." Charles's final word was simple: remember. And history has. Not as the tyrant he was, nor the saint his followers imagined, but as the man whose death forced the world to redefine power itself. His severed head became a symbol of warning, of faith, of consequence. And the shadow of that axe still stretches across time. If you believe history should be told unfiltered, not polished, not forgotten, like and share this story. Also subscribe to the channel because every kingdom that forgets its past is bound to lose its head again.